I mean, I wouldn't say
mic check.
Check, check, check.
All right.
This time?
It sounds as though we want to go ahead and get started. All right. Well, that was easier than Patty's wrangling of the crowd. Appreciate you all joining this late afternoon session. Going to wrap this up with forestry and vegetation management around the wildfire risk. Easier said than done, but I'm looking forward to the engagement. And we are here to ask for your help. We're going to start with just room safety. Again, we've got exits fore and aft in the room. We'd go towards the fountain and then head out towards Camino Ramon on the main road in the case of an earthquake or an event, anything negative that would interrupt our little talk with you this afternoon. So thanks again for joining us. Wildfire, forestry, and vegetation management, easiest topics of the day. I'm Ty McCartney. I'm the manager of our vegetation asset strategy and analytics team. It's a new group formed under our wildfire risk management organization. And we basically work on the planning, the implementation, and the strategy for our vegetation management execution team. And here with me today is Kevin Johnson. I'll let him introduce him.
Hi, Kevin Johnson with the Utility Partnerships team, really focused on the stand that PG&E take in the catastrophic wildfire shall stop. I wonder if my mic's coming through okay.
Yep.
Good. Okay, good.
All right, so this is a little bit of a repeat, but more on the veg focus on, what is it we're doing to layer risk mitigation as a company? Our community wildfire safety program, situational awareness, minimizing ignition risks, and minimizing the consequence of fire. So Kevin just mentioned the big challenge here is we want to be part of stopping catastrophic wildfires in California. We want to stop them, okay? We want to stop being a source of ignitions, and we want to stop the fires that we have no control over, lightning fires, from getting worse and destroying our communities in ways that we can help and partner. So underneath all of that, it starts with situational awareness. We got to make sure our workforce, 30,000 strong out there, operating safely, working within and knowing the risk conditions that they're working in. We're doing dangerous work, hot work, we're doing tree work, and we rely upon a network of daily indexing that can be changed midday to limit our operations. So we got to be paying attention. We got to know what the risks are as we're performing this work, especially veg management work. It's incredibly dangerous. You're above the lines. You got certified trimmers in a high risk environment, felling and removing limbs in proximity to the power lines. So in that, we're going to be talking a lot about the work that we do to keep trees from falling and growing into our assets. I was drawn to this industry because of a concept when I was studying forestry. Vegetation management's forever. And that had to do with like type conversion and other things, but it's really true, but that's not enough. What I want is to find the people in this room that could help me get to where everybody recognizes that vegetation management is important, it's necessary, and it's beneficial to our communities when we do it right. But defining what right looks like, that's what this room's about. That's where we need your help. We've been on a charge for many years, doing really good work. We prevent a lot of work, a lot of fires, a lot of things that go invisible. But what does right look like moving forward with the new stuff? And in that, how do we blend the veg management work we do for regulations and conductor clearance, reliability, wildfire safety? How do we blend that into the communities and make it to where we are partnered and not alone? PG&E's in the forest every day with a small army, actually a pretty big army of qualified workers, coordinating, working with property owners. They might not want us there. How do we partner with the other agencies, the other stakeholders in the community to where all the mechanisms are functioning in kind of more of a harmony? And we're not just a one-off person knocking on the door saying we got to trim a tree. How do we turn that into a resilient forest, a healthy forest through our other activities, which Kevin's going to speak to? So we've been on a journey, okay? And I've been part of that journey. PG&E started an inspection army when the general order said, hey, you got to get 18 inches and you have to have that year round. That was a big deal in the late 90s. Kind of threw California into this space where we had to stand up annual patrols to make sure that we didn't have tree vegetation conflicts. 18 inches, okay? Fast forward to the drought years and the tree mortality. That was the baseline for annual patrol. We started doing more. We had to react. We had to deal with the massive tree mortality going on in the South Sierra Nevada, Central Sierra Nevada range. So we started doing second patrols. In addition to those, in our highest risk areas, the highest areas impacted by beetle kill, drought, tree mortality, and trying to keep a vigil on that. So annual patrol, second patrol in high risk areas. We need solutions. We need your help on figuring out what's next. Where is the other opportunity? We're tracking well over $1.5 billion a year. We're working to control those costs because we got to make our services affordable and meaningful, less risky, and vegetation's kind of one of our main elements to help reduce and get to those risks. So we're working on risk targeted programs. What does that mean in California for PG&E service territory? It's diverse. What we're doing in the coast forest from Santa Cruz to Humboldt with up to 250 plus tall foot trees with overhang that can be 200 feet up. How do we mitigate that compared to our coast oak woodlands? Compared to the South Sierra, which is a little drier than the North Sierra, as opposed to the Central Valley and our more built environment and the transition and the interface, okay? It's a big challenge. We got a lot of trees and we got a way to get to this risk environment. Is it through modeling? I think sometimes it is, but modeling tells you where to look. But can you work the model from both ends? In a coast oak woodland, I might be able to eliminate risk by working a small volume of trees. But if a risk model puts me at the top risk, it's going to put me in a closed canopy forest where I'm just changing the risk to a degree, or it's got a shelf life of risk reduction that's going to come back. Overhang reduction, all of these things become what does right look like when you've got that much attention, that big of a budget, and that much of an eagerness to tackle a huge problem with reducing catastrophic fires, eliminating catastrophic fires in California as a partner in the community. So our problem statements, these are kind of a big deal when you've worked in the industry and you look at it, you're like, you already do annual and second patrol. But how do we harness the regional data that's available? How do we find the right covariates, the right elements of data that tell us, you know what, in this area, soil moisture is a major key and a major driver in this forest and cover type? How do we get to that? Site-specific regional data that tells us how often to inspect, what our problematic species are, what the drivers of those failures are, and what does moisture mean in the element? We get questions. Are you incorporating moisture? Is it live fuel moisture? Is it dead fuel moisture? Is it soil moisture? Is it atmospheric moisture? Maybe it's all of them. But is it all of them everywhere? I don't know. I don't have the answers. That's why we need an innovation summit. How can we get to where we have specific regional targets that are meaningful, that we can track progress and reduce outages and potential ignitions? Problem statement 2, healthy green trees. We can go out and we can look at trees. Most trees have a dead component, dead limbs, maybe some defects, but how do you identify the defects that are truly a risk to the assets that we're trying to minimize them impacting the electrical overhead assets? And more importantly, how do we communicate those defects on a tree that looks perfectly healthy to a customer, perfectly healthy to an agency that's protecting the tree? You know, think of our roadside trees. They're valued assets on the coast. We've found a defect. We've got a concern. How do we work to partner to where it's not just PG&E looking like the utility wants to do this work for them? No, we're doing it to make the community safe. We're doing it to make resilient forests. We're doing it to foster community safety, public safety. But when we find a problem, first of all, detecting that problem isn't as easy as a visual inspection. We're doing other level 2 inspections. We're trying to follow industry standards, but are there other tools? Are there other technologies that you can bring to us and help us better identify defects in trees that look perfectly healthy to everybody else, but maybe a certified arborist, and then communicate and work through those challenges? The third one, wildfires. There's not two alike. We have problematic fuel conditions in California. This room probably knows about that, but for me, in this space, fires have different intensity and duration, no matter where you go. Sometimes that leaves a lot of residual fuel, other times it doesn't. But what does right look like following a fire? What are the right treatments to do on the short term to get these communities back to normal, get people back in their homes if they weren't damaged, as opposed to Sorry, that was a little distracting. Just clear cutting and putting this stuff in and doing it in the name of safety. Some of these are the only trees left on people's property. They come home, they're like, my house was saved. I've got 2 trees left, and now you're telling me I got to take out the 1 tree that was fire damaged. Because the other thing that's unique in California, a lot of fire prone systems, the trees will recover. They will recover. They're going to be damaged. They're going to have compromises, but a lot of times they'll recover. And how do we navigate that in between other solutions in our repertoire, whether it's undergrounding, okay, or system hardening? But what does right look like? I think that's a big challenge for partnership, for the regulatory space, for just working with our customers, because believe it or not, undergrounding has vegetation management as well. I'm going to go back to vegetation management's forever. Even if we underground, we have to be thinking about what's going to put pressure on that system, what's going to keep that system safe. So we need to be focusing on vegetation management programs through at least these suites and many others to make sure that vegetation management is recognized as important, okay, necessary, and beneficial to our community that we serve. So with that, all right, I think I'm transferring to Kevin.
Green is.
There we go.
All right. So we do all this good vegetation management work that Ty talked about, and then you have a bunch of wood you have to do something with afterwards. And that creates another set of kind of challenges and things to think about. So wood is bulky, it's heavy. It's a big cost center for PG&E in that $1.5 billion. It's not a small number there. And it's I think where I'm trying to go, sorry. Yeah, so and then in addition to that, you have the cost of trucking, the pollution that creates, the disturbance to communities that drives through, and then also motor vehicle safety risk every mile that a truck is driven. And so all these represent kind of opportunities to improve operations, improve safety, improve environment. So what do we do today? We, if wood is underneath a certain size, PG&E will typically take that wood away. If it's over a certain size, it is the customer's property, and we typically leave that with the customer. Not all customers want that wood, and sometimes they'll complain that it creates a secondary wildfire hazard or risk. And so that's a challenging area. And then when our contractors do take the wood away, it often goes to electric biomass generation facilities. And you can think about when that is burned, all the carbon that was taken from up in the air through photosynthesis, it just goes right back up. The grid is otherwise pretty darn clean with renewables and hydro and nuclear. So it's not making the grid cleaner by doing that. The electric power is also generally more expensive than the other power that we procure. And so all PG&E customers have to pay more on their bill for basically being able to keep these biomass facilities open. Not saying there's not a place or a role for electric generation, but there are some industries that could really use the help with this biomass. So when you think about decarbonization pathways, and this has been alluded to a little bit today, you want to try and clean the grid, and then you want to try and electrify as many things as possible, and then deal with the rest. That's kind of the playbook. And so to the extent we can clean the grid, that's great. But all that other stuff that comes after that, that is, so you think about aviation and shipping and heavy industry and agriculture. These are all difficult kind of areas to decarbonize. And so the wood can actually represent an opportunity. There's embedded energy there that could basically be transformed into ways to displace some of this fossil fuel use. So it doesn't have to be drilled or mined. It can also be a means of sucking carbon kind of out of the carbon cycle. And so you could think that wood can be turned into biodiesel, or something else you might have heard about today, renewable natural gas that could help clean up our pipeline system. We turned into mass timber, which could displace kind of steel and cement related emissions and lock it up in buildings for tens of hundreds of years. And then you could also, for example, turn it into biochar, which could biochemically kind of lock up the carbon. So it's going to be there for tens, thousands, hundreds of years. And it actually literally takes it out of the carbon cycle. So, and interestingly, with energy and biomass, you can actually do all of that. So theoretically, you could create RNG while also capturing carbon. And so you're actually creating carbon negative energy that's actually running the meter backwards on carbon. And so that's a big opportunity. And there are only, you could think about having, farms that grow biomass crops just to create this. But in California, we actually have the opportunity to restore ecological health, reduce wildfire risk, and get this biomass that can then be this carbon negative force as we try and clean up and decarbonize California in the decades to come. So we're at risk of path dependence, where if all wood, the reflex is to always have it go to electricity, we might get locked in to the point where then we're not setting up this other infrastructure for these, frankly, much harder to decarbonize areas. And so that's another opportunity. And so you can see some of the different areas for opportunity on this slide. We've done some trials in the last year or two where we have managed wood in the field, and Bermbot was one of those who's come up before. We've densified wood, which makes it then a lot lower cost to then move around, and then we've also transformed wood into more useful things. And so we've tried that, but it feels like it's very early days for a lot of this stuff. Veg tech is kind of a new thing, and so I feel like there's a lot more potential runway there. And then after that, you also can. Man, sorry, my brain is not working fully today. Anyway, so that's one big opportunity there is basically to turn the wood into this useful things and try and get the densification and the conversion into these high-end products. So the other thing that you could do counterintuitively to reduce the cost of dollar per ton of wood managed is to actually create a lot more of it. And so basically, if you ecologically manage forests, theoretically, and this is not theoretically, I shouldn't say that, kind of a headline of this discussion is catastrophic wildfires can be mitigated, not fully, but definitely a lot, with healthy forests. And so if we help to restore forest health, you can see what's on the right. That's kind of more what California's forests looked like for thousands of years with active management, with lightning fire from the former from native inhabitants. And on the left, after we had this kind of fire suppression regime, we have more biomass. A lot of it's kind of diseased. And then you have these really high intensity fires that can burn the soil, it can burn the trees, it can climb up the ladder fuels, get into the canopies, embers fly away. The fires get out of control very quickly, very hard to control. And then it's hard to even create control lines to actually then fight the fire. And so if we can revert forests to that right side, we actually are reducing catastrophic wildfire risk. And so this is something that PG&E is exploring right now, is the idea of maybe creating another tool in our toolbox for reducing catastrophic wildfire risk, which is basically to restore forest health, to partner to restore forest health, and which might potentially be a more cost-effective solution than a lot of our toolbox today. The nice thing about this, there are a lot of co-benefits. And so, by itself, if we can more cost-effectively reduce risk from power line ignition, that's great. You also can actually protect customers from all wildfires. So that's a key thing. So to take a step back, CAL FIRE looked at the top 20 most destructive wildfires in California history. 6 of those were ignited by power lines from utilities. The other 14 were not. They were from something else. We have a wildfire mitigation plan that spends $5.5 billion to try and address those 30% of fires started by power lines. The other 70%, the full 100%, really it's about $1 billion for the entire California wildfire resilience budget to handle those. So you can think about if we develop this tool and start to rebalance and re-optimize, it could look very different in the future, but we need to kind of develop this tool set and this new muscle. And as you've heard earlier today, PG made a stand, catastrophic wildfire shall stop. It did not clarify just the ones started by power lines. It was kind of more categorical thing. Undergrounding can help those 30% or other solutions you've heard about today. But if you want to get to all 100%, you need to be focused on consequence reduction, spread reduction. And so this is a tool that theoretically could help reduce wildfire safety risk for everybody. And so there's a lot of value there. That's a co-benefit to this. Another co-benefit is water supply and quality enhancement. About 60% of potable water in California comes from California's forests, a lot of those from the Sierras. And so if you think about it, just have less straws in the ground soaking up the water, you're going to end up having more water flowing down to reservoirs. It's going to be actually better quality water. And so you actually can make California more drought resilient as a co-benefit to this wildfire benefit. Also, when fires do come through, we're not going to have as much carbon and smoke go up when those fires happen. And again, these are fire adapted and fire dependent ecosystems. Typically in California, the fire is regenerative. It can be good. You want good fire, but you want it to not be too smoky when that happens. And ideally, especially not when it's catastrophic. California is also a biodiversity hotspot for Conservation International. We are kind of a treasure trove of genetic diversity that's kind of a resource for the entire globe, and preventing these catastrophic fires can also help preserve the biodiversity. You can also think about rural jobs, and a lot of rural communities had a hard time in the 80s and 90s in lumber communities. this is an opportunity to actually help bring jobs back to those communities. And before they're cutting down the big trees, and now we could actually have them, people at work basically restoring forests, going around the big trees to cut down the small trees to make for healthy forests and build new industries doing that. And last, all that feedstock could then create these climate positive industries that I talked about before and helping to decarbonize these really hard to decarbonize sectors. So co-benefits to this one thing that could help reduce catastrophic wildfire itself. And so there is a technology component to this. I don't want to belittle that. That's definitely there, but this is also maybe a little different in nature than some of the other stuff we've heard about today. Not just technology, we also need to figure out new partnerships, because most of this would not be on PG&E land. We need to figure out effective partnership models where we can lean in and help this type of work to happen. Could be new public-private partnerships, for example, new financial structures to structure the work, optimization models to figure out where to do it. We need to figure out how to value this work in a defensible way that could withstand scrutiny from stakeholders, and also to be able to account for it. And if you think about it this way, if you're doing landscape scale wildfire risk reduction and forest health restoration, and it's a long-term investment, and there's a long time before the vegetation grows back to the point where you have to do it again, and you get all these co-benefits, it sounds a lot like infrastructure to me. I think healthy forests, you can make a strong case, healthy forests are a form of infrastructure. And if that is the case, PG&E could actually help recruit Wall Street dollars to funnel those dollars into basically California's forests to help restore the forest. So I think a lot of potential dimensions to look at here. The other one is, I've alluded to this a little bit, would be developing a new muscle, because typically PG&E goes in and we have control over our rights of way and over our equipment, and we go in and we make whatever fixes needed. In this case, this would be PG&E empowering our customers and our communities and other wildfire stakeholders to do what needs to be done. And so basically, if they are creating more safety, and it's a good deal for our customers because we're offsetting other costs and we're getting all these benefits, we basically could empower these communities to accomplish what they want to do. And so it's not quite leading from behind, but we could play an empowering role to unlock things that might not otherwise happen. It would be a new muscle for us, but I think it's one worth exploring. So in short, a lot of opportunity, potential, dimensions for innovation. Really interested to hear any thoughts you have related to how we can kind of capitalize on this opportunity. We've got the Q&A card with perfect timing. I think we're ready for questions.
Hi, I'm Nick from Bay Area Redwood. Actually recycled 200 trees here through Bishop Branch, about to another 100 across the way. Could I have you go back one slide? I have a question for you. How many miles are y'all trucking? I think y'all have like 1.92 million trees that come down per year. What's the average miles trucked per tree or per truckload?
Gosh, I don't have an exact answer for you, but we're operating against 47 counties.
Yep.
Every day, working on over 80,000 line miles on our distribution system, another 17 for our transmission system. And again, that regional variation in work, but we've got to get to every line mile, and we got to get the trees work that need it. This brings in another thing, but I don't have an exact mileage, but I'm happy to try to follow up on that, on how many miles are trucked. But
do you have an average DBH on the trees? So I know the polygons you'll have, which are like 2 square kilometers, and there's like a whole bunch of data for each one of those. So what I'm looking for is data for, one is how far are things trucked. A second is, how much material is there? I was doing kind of a back of the envelope calculation. How many truckloads is that? So I'd love to connect further on some of that data. I don't know if you have that now, but or if y'all track that.
No, it's so again, as we work the trees, and you're talking about trees removed, that's going to be the full spectrum of DBH classes, including large multi-stem trees that are in essence multiple trees from that perspective. So you would have to look at our work completed data, and that number changes. We're working no less than 1 to 1.2 million trees a year. Those aren't all removals. More and more, we're increasing the removal composition. But again, that size class is going to be incredibly regionally variable, and it's going to be species specific. And again, it's big data really on just any given year. So I don't have an exact answer.
Understood. Thank you very much.
And I have a few responses to that too. One, I remember what I forgot to say on the slide, is partly that another opportunity area is to shorten those distances. So if there are more yards or depots, and there are kind of different ways of looking at it, and I'm not sure it would just be PG&E stuff. I think there could be opportunity when others are doing work too. Maybe we could share in those kind of resources. It's a different model that we could look at, which is again, a different type of innovation. Also, we can also look at the wood can actually be turned into hydrogen or electricity or CNG, renewable natural gas, actually power those trucks. And so there are kind of other potential areas of opportunity. If you think about it from a systems perspective, how do we all work together to kind of decarbonize and reduce fuel costs for mutual benefit? So throwing that out there too. The other thing on your question on volume is that from my experience from afar, and I don't work in vegetation management, but that data is all over the place. Given year to year and area by area, it depends on if there's a fire, it depends on if there's a policy change, depends on if there's tree mortality. It's really hard to pin down, like, this is what usually comes. So we have bare level compliance vegetation management, which creates a bit of wood. This is kind of consistent. And then there's just incredible amount of variability. So it I think, from my opinion, creates a premium on how can you be mobile and flexible with these solutions. And so in some respects, it's good to have a big centralized plant where you get a lot of CapEx and scale. But in a lot of cases, there could be a lot of value in our perspective to actually move things around the state as their different acute needs, which would then change that transportation, question quite a bit too. Yeah.
Sashi Sabaratnam, former mayor of Mill Valley and former Sonoma County Wildfire Vegetation Mitigation Program Manager. And I've done quite a bit of work in Sonoma and Marin counties in exactly what you're talking about, of trying to coordinate those vegetation management activities. And I'm interested to hear that there's a desire to, kind of get a foothold in the healthy forest kind of domain. I'm curious where you see PG&E's role relative to California's wildfire and forest resilience action plan. All of these things and all of these things that you're talking about are somewhat, kind of mapped out in that action plan. There's the woody feedstock aggregation pilots going on. There are the Cal Fire Forest Health, grant initiatives. So that piece of it, and then very specifically on what you were talking about earlier, where do you see the forest practice rules kind of fitting into how you think about these things? Because I know that's a concern of kind of more of the rural and agricultural communities.
I'm glad you like easy questions. I think at the minimum, this is why Kevin and I are here talking, is you start to bridge the drivers behind, the clearances, okay, whether it's GO95, 4293, but our fire break program, 4292, is right next to defensible space, okay, 4291, 4292, 4293. They're married in the code. I mean, they're just right next to one another. I think starting at the basics, it's literally synergizing off of defensible space, 100-foot rule, and starting people, it's kind of like seed money. Hey, if we come in and do this and we coordinate these removals and they coordinate with your exemptions for defensible space, how can we make this vegetation management forever our collective challenge and get us out of their yards, because we know the community or the owner is going to maintain that space. So think about that around our distribution corridors. Working that out and broadening it, it's coordinating with the regional water quality control boards. It's coordinating with CAL FIRE and Cal VTP and the other landscape level stuff out there, where we start to connect and create a broader network of resilient shaded fuel breaks, a resilient forest that's healthy. Another place I see this is us coming in post-fire. What do we do to take care of that? Basically, not take advantage of the fuel reduction, but we just had something happen in the forest. How do we prevent that from becoming a problem in 2 years, 3 years, 8 years, forever? So again, I'm going to go back to that vegetation management forever. How do we bridge forest practice rules in PG&E's territory? We need constructive partnerships. We need policy change that recognizes the balance between reducing catastrophic wildfire risks and promoting commercial tree species. What is that balance? I think what Kevin's working on is part of that balance. But as we underground, as we work on other mitigations that prove effective, as we get better at targeting where the risk really resides, I think we're going to get closer to the solutions you're looking for and less conflict. But at the underneath all this, that's my appeal. How do we become a partner in the landscape and not the utility coming in to take out people's cherished trees? In California, that's not easy. I was drawn to forestry because I love trees. I love oak trees. I don't like taking them out. So I want to find solutions as the utility that help foster really all the benefits and quite honestly, the investment PG&E can bring into the landscape, because we do reduce risk. We can do it constructively, and we can promote healthy forests. But when that conflicts with forest practice rules, it's really a challenge. It's really a challenge. So,
I can talk to you more about it later, but there are things like, if there's a tree that you're felling and your contractor has not been really directed to follow forest practice rules, and, you're going to fell the tree over this way, and now it's across the stream, and now the, Fish and Wildlife is not going to let the owner remove the tree, versus if you had felled it this way, then they would be able to do it. It would be, usable. They're operational details like that are what are going to confound those things that you're talking about.
And along that is, our guidance is to follow environmental policy, to be good stewards of the land and do the work that's necessary. And, right now, the board of the Water Quality Control Board of California is proposing a new set of general orders that basically say, hey, we recognize you got to do this wildfire mitigation work, including veg management, but here's your best management practices, avoidance mitigation measures, and a permitting process for you to follow. I think the recognition at that level and really the initial, like, hey, can you review this draft? It's a sign we're moving in the right direction. But we need to make sure that, our workforce is in tune to the environmental regulations as they relate to our public safety work. Absolutely.
Ty, I've got some online questions over here. Is PG&E working with our state's tribal partners to leverage their knowledge of prescribed burning and good fire?
Okay.
I'll give it a shot first, I guess.
Perfect.
I think we would like to. I think there's a reticence on the PG&E side to be the ones paying for fire starting. And so I don't know that we're going to be incorporating kind of controlled burns in the traditional fashion soon. We might take but that said, we've funded, PG&E Corporation has funded tribes to basically do more of this work and to actually do education so they can educate more people to do it. Very supportive. I just don't know if it'll be an operational tool on our side. But I don't know, these policies change year by year. What was your thought?
I think that there's more opportunity than ever. As we stood up our shutoff, public safety power shutoff program, we have tribal liaisons. I've worked on programs that have worked to, honor the TARO agreements on tribal lands. And I really think that it's about getting that partner. If tribal domains become a partner of ours, and as we come in, we're able to coordinate and facilitate their kind of legacy heritage use of the land, their intended goal of bringing fire back into the landscape in a safe way. I think prescribed fire and tribal coordination are both very, how do we get beneficial fire, not catastrophic fire, back in the landscape?
Yeah.
And I think tribal lands are a great place to do that because there is that heritage and history.
I actually want to amend my response, I guess, too. So there's the question of like doing it on PG&E lands or under our wires. In the traditional sense, I'm not sure we're going to do that. But if we do get into the landscape scale stuff we're talking about here, and we're working with a bunch of different landowners, I mean, prescribed fire is something that's going to be needed to do for this to happen. So I could see a role, I think, on the landscape scale side, there are a lot of roles PG&E can play. And that's kind of a whole other deep dive that we can have offline if we don't have time here. But we could theoretically be helping to pay for or help with grants or other kind of like catalytic funding for bigger landscape scale projects, which could include that cultural burning. But again, we're in very early days of figuring out how that would all fit together.
Yeah, and I can say that we any prescribed fire, we want to be there. We want to be there proactively to make sure that it's done in a safe way that's compliant with our regulations, protects our assets, and helps establish a safer outcome.
Let's get another online question. What are some of the regulatory barriers that PG&E faces from achieving a more streamlined vegetation management? Are there policy focus areas you are considering as well as innovation? I'm looking at you.
Yeah. Okay. So, we're working with OEIS. They've got Green Grid. We're looking at really the book of regulatory, and for me, it's aligning. All right. And we've had the general orders and GO 95 Rule 35. We've had the public resource codes that are clarified in Title 14 of the California Code of Regulations. There's exemptions to the type of work that we do that we're not necessarily aligned on how to interpret those all the time with the Board of Forestry and CAL FIRE's Enforcement Division. I'd like to think I'm on the tip of that spear, trying to get the conversations going, get it to where we are aligned, whether it's the commission or CAL FIRE or OEIS, and our obligations that we put forth in our wildfire mitigation plans, they're aligned around a central body of code. And if it's mixing and matching, but standardizing, I think that's kind of our path forward. But that policy level shift, I mean, we're working with Cal Poly's newly developed Wildland Urban Interface Institute. And as they were asking me, what do you think we need? We need policy change. Forestry, it needs innovation. A lot of the rules on the books, the regulation, was born through Cal Fire in the 40s for logging practices. That doesn't recognize the modern demands and needs for utilities to perform work in the forest. So another big question. Excited to hear about it, but I think it's harmonizing the regulation, balancing wildfire risk reduction with environmental limitations and environmental regulations. So we offset the impacts. Are there some potential, I guess, conflicts? Yes, absolutely. But is a catastrophic wildfire the solution if we don't agree, align, and interpret in a way that is partnering? So we need partnership, we need policy shift that recognizes the absolute urgency that this work happened.
Yeah, that's a deep question. These are very good questions, by the way, all of them so far. I mean, you could talk about insurance reform. There's really not necessarily an incentive for people to restore the safety, wildfire safety right now. You could look at the renewable fuel standard. If wood's coming out of the forest, it doesn't get that subsidy. And so then everyone has to start tracking wood, and was it private or public? And it makes it harder to do public land work and to site these big facilities. It's all over the map. I feel like it's well. Yeah.
Hey, Josh with Google X. I'm curious of the billions and billions of dollars that are being put toward this peril. I would imagine a large portion of that is just mechanically removing vegetation. It's like a very cost-intensive measure, but there's a lot of interesting ideas on here. What type of percentage, I guess, of the money that's coming downstream is kind of for exploring these new efforts is like question one. And question two is, how are you prioritizing a lot of these new ideas? Is it purely by what has the highest return on risk reduction for this season? Is it looking forward a certain number of years? Is it prioritizing certain communities? It's just so much money, and I'm just curious, and so many ideas, right? So I'm just kind of curious, how are you prioritizing all of this?
Thank you. Yeah, another great question. So there's a lot of money coming down from a lot of different sources. So it's hard to even speak to all those kind of potential sources. You have the DOE GRIP funding, you have the Department of Agriculture, and you have, frankly, internal transfers, the U.S. Forest Service, and you have the CAL FIRE grants. It's kind of all over the map. So I think we're trying to basically figure out how can we, I'd say that the general overarching theme right now is how do we put points on the board with these new ideas? We just need to just show some wins and show this is done, and how it can be done, and then how it can be scaled. And that's kind of the goal going into 2024 is wherever there's on the ground kind of momentum and community that's bought in. And ideally some of the NEPA planning already done if it's on federal land or CEQA or whatever it is, such that we can actually move. And then there are also potential synergies around, for example, wood management. So if people are doing big projects and we can throw our wood on the back of their truck and we can lower our costs together, like let's do it. So I'd say we're being very opportunistic right now. But I would say longer term, ideally, this is all science-based, and it's a question, and we have community protection, I think will probably be the biggest thing that carries the day. But we also have asset protection. If we do some of the stuff, we could also improve reliability. Maybe we don't do EPSS quite as much. We change the standards, for example, or PSPS. I don't want to say we could do that, but like it's on the table to explore. And then we have all these hydro assets too, that we could be defending, and transmission assets. The smoke and cause outages there. It's all over the map. And so these are all very tough valuation questions. I think that public safety part is number one, but like in different areas, it may be a different kind of mix. And I would also probably say, I could see first prioritizing high risk, low resource areas, probably first, but we'll see.
Another question online, Kevin, probably for you. You mentioned PG&E is working with BurnBot. How much prescribed burning is PG&E doing today? What are the biggest hurdles preventing PG&E from expanding its use of prescribed burns?
We've done, to my knowledge, we've done prescribed burns once, which was last month in Pittsburgh with BurnBot. So I'd say we have done one. We have two more demonstrations coming probably later this year. I mean, it's a new product, and I'm just gonna say like it's not intended to be commercial until next year. So we want to see it, and really understand how it works, and understand the risk profile, and understand when and where we can really use it. We're just gathering data right now. We're learning, and then we'll see.
All right, did we have one? Time's up. Oh,
Wow.
so we'll be staying and I'll take the opportunity to remind you there is the reception following this. We don't want to get in the way of you participating in that, enjoying the tail end of the day. We'll be sticking around. I know I'll be sticking around for questions.
Yeah, happy to connect. We've also been coached to tell you that there's a plenary session in the main hall. So go there first, and then we are
Yeah.
happy to connect more after.
Yes, there's one more talk.
Thank you.